What if I told you that giants once walked this earth? Not fairy tale giants, but real beings who stood 36 feet tall and possessed technology that makes our modern world look primitive. These weren't stories made up around campfires. Every ancient culture on Earth tells the same tale. The Greeks called them Titans. The Norse knew them as Jotuns. The Bible names them Nephilim. Hindu texts speak of the Daityas. Native Americans remember the Siteka. Think about that for a moment. How is it possible that civilizations separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years all remembered the same thing? People who never met, never traded, never shared stories. Yet they all spoke of the same giant beings who once ruled the world. But here's what's really mind-blowing, and this is where things get controversial. These giants didn't just exist. They built monuments so incredible that our best engineers today scratch their heads trying to figure out how it was done. Have you ever wondered how ancient people moved stones weighing 1,200 tons? That's heavier than a modern jet airplane. Yet, somehow, these massive blocks were lifted hundreds of feet into the air and placed with precision that would challenge our most advanced cranes. In Lebanon, there's a stone block called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. It weighs 1,650 tons. To put that in perspective, the largest crane in the world today can only lift about 20,000 tons. And that's with modern hydraulics, steel cables, and computer assistance. How did ancient people move something that heavy? But wait, it gets even stranger. These massive stones weren't just moved. They were carved with laser-like precision. The joints between them are so tight you can't slide a piece of paper between them. No mortar was used, yet these structures have stood for thousands of years through earthquakes, wars, and weather that would topple our modern buildings. And here's something that'll really make you think. Many of these megalithic sites are perfectly aligned with stars and constellations. Not just any stars, but specific celestial events that happen only once every 26,000 years. Knowledge. What happened to them? Where did they go? And why does every culture remember their destruction in the same way? The answer to that question takes us back to the very beginning of time itself. Before there were humans, before there was Earth as we know it. Back to when the universe was nothing but darkness and the deep. You see, the story of the giants isn't just ancient history. It's a warning, because, according to every ancient text, from the Bible to the Book of Enoch to Hindu scriptures, what happened before is going to happen again. The cycle is repeating. The same powers that created and destroyed the world of giants are at work today. Secret societies guard their knowledge, ancient bloodlines maintain their influence, and somewhere in the shadows, the descendants of those who survived the Great Catastrophe are preparing for something big. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what's coming, we first need to understand what was. We need to go back to the beginning, back to when water covered everything and darkness ruled the deep. We need to understand how paradise was lost, how giants came to rule the earth, and why heaven itself decided that the world had to be destroyed and started over. Coming up next, we'll explore the cosmic battle that set everything in motion, a war in heaven that split the universe itself and sent fallen angels tumbling toward a young, innocent earth. You won't believe what they brought with them and how it changed everything. So, grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and prepare yourself for a journey through time that will challenge everything you thought you knew about human history. Because this isn't just a story, it's the story. The one that explains why the world is the way it is, and where it's all heading. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every word of this. Picture this: absolute nothingness. Not darkness, because darkness requires light to define it. Not silence, because silence needs sound to give it meaning. Just nothing. No space, no time, no matter, no energy. Nothing. This is harder to imagine than you might think. When you close your eyes, love that had nowhere to go. But here's a theory that might surprise you. What if creation wasn't God's first attempt? What if there were other universes before ours? Other experiments in existence that didn't work out? The Kabbalists, Jewish mystics who studied hidden meanings in ancient texts, actually believed this. They taught that our universe is the fifth attempt at creation. The previous four were destroyed because they couldn't contain the divine light without shattering. Think about that. What if our entire reality is just the latest model in a series of cosmic prototypes? What if the giants we're going to talk about were leftovers from an earlier version of existence? But let's focus on what we do know from the ancient accounts. The first thing created wasn't matter or energy. It was consciousness, the ability to observe, to know, to choose. This consciousness was then divided into countless individual points of awareness. We call them angels. These weren't the chubby baby angels you see on greeting cards. Ancient texts describe them as beings of pure intelligence and power. Some had the faces of lions, others of eagles. Some had 6 wings. Others had wheels within wheels covered in eyes. They were alien to us in every way except one. They could think, they could choose, and they could love. Here's something most people don't realize. Angels weren't created to be servants. They were created to be family. The Hebrew word for angel, malak, actually means messenger, but it also means ambassador. They weren't slaves. They were representatives of the divine will who chose to serve because they loved their creator. And this is where free will enters the picture. Because love can't be forced. Real love requires the option to say no. So these beings of incredible power were given a choice: serve willingly or don't serve at all. For a time, that might have been eons or might have been moments. Remember, time didn't exist yet in the way we understand it. All the angels chose love. Heaven was perfect harmony. Pure beings working together in joy so complete, it created music that made the very foundations of reality ring like crystal bells. But here's the thing about free will. It's dangerous. The ability to choose good necessarily half. Brother fought against brother in realms beyond our imagination. The very fabric of existence was torn as beings of pure light turned their power against each other. But here's the controversial part. Some ancient texts suggest this war isn't over. They say the battle that began in heaven continues on earth today. The same choice that faced the angels, to serve love or to serve self, is the choice every human faces every single day. And according to these texts, we're approaching the final round of this cosmic conflict. The fallen angels who lost the war in heaven have been preparing their ultimate revenge for thousands of years. They've been building toward one last attempt to overthrow the divine order. If you're intrigued by where this is heading, make sure you subscribe, because this story spans from the foundations of reality to events happening right now in our world. And I promise you, the connections will blow your mind. Coming up, the war that changed everything and sent the losers tumbling toward a young, innocent planet called Earth. They brought with them knowledge that was never meant for human minds, and technologies that would reshape the world in ways both wonderful and terrible. Heaven before the rebellion was perfect in ways we can barely imagine. Picture the most beautiful symphony ever composed. where every note is played by beings whose voices could create stars. Imagine architecture so magnificent that light itself bows down in worship. Think of harmony so complete that even the concept of discord had never been invented. In this realm of absolute perfection, hierarchy wasn't about power over others. It was about the joy of serving something greater than yourself. Every angel knew their role and loved it completely. The cherubim who surrounded the throne didn't feel jealous of their position. They felt honored. The seraphim who cried, "Holy, holy, holy," didn't get tired of the repetition. Each time felt like the first time, and at the pinnacle of this heavenly order stood Lucifer. The ancient texts describe him as perfect in beauty and full of wisdom. He was covered with precious stones: sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, rebellion. Here's where different ancient traditions give us different answers, and this is where it gets controversial. The mainstream view is that pride corrupted Lucifer's heart. He looked at his own beauty and began to love himself more than his creator. The famous verse from Isaiah, "I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God," captures this prideful ambition. But some ancient Jewish texts suggest something different. They claim Lucifer rebelled not out of pride, but out of principle. According to these sources, when God announced his plan to create humans, beings lower than angels, but who would be given dominion over creation, Lucifer objected. Why, he argued, should creatures made of dirt be elevated above beings made of light? Why should mortals who live for decades rule over immortals who have served for eons? This interpretation makes the rebellion more complex. Was Lucifer a proud usurper, or was he a principled objector to what he saw as an unjust decision? The answer matters because it affects how we understand the cosmic conflict that followed. What we do know is that Lucifer didn't rebel alone. The book of Revelation tells us that his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. This means 1/3 of all angels, billions upon billions of perfect beings, chose to follow Lucifer in his rebellion. Think about that for a moment. These weren't ignorant creatures making bad decisions. These were beings of perfect intelligence who had direct experience of God's goodness and power. Yet somehow, Lucifer's arguments convinced 1/3 of them to risk everything for the chance to be free from divine authority. The war that followed wasn't fought with swords and shields. Beings of pure spirit don't need physical weapons. They fought with the power of their will, with words that could reshape reality, with thoughts that could create or destroy entire dimensions. The Archangel Michael led the loyal forces. His battle cry, "Who is like God?" became their rallying point. Against him stood Lucifer and his followers, armed with grievances they believed were just, and power they thought could never be defeated. The ancient texts describe this conflict in terms that sound almost like science fiction. Stars fell like lightning falling from the sky. Jesus himself witnessed this cosmic catastrophe. In the Gospel of Luke, he says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." This wasn't metaphorical language. This was eyewitness testimony to the greatest defeat in cosmic history. But here's where the story takes a turn that affects us directly. The fallen angels didn't just disappear into some distant punishment. They fell to Earth. Our young, innocent planet became their prison, their battlefield, and their opportunity for revenge. These beings who had walked in the very presence of God, who knew the secrets of creation, who possessed power that could reshape matter itself, they were now confined to our realm. And they were angry. Coming up, we'll discover what happened when these cosmic refugees decided to make the best of their exile. They found a paradise called Eden, inhabited by two innocent humans who had no idea what was about to hit them. And that's when everything changed, forever. After the dust settled from the heavenly war, God turned his attention to a small blue planet spinning in the outer arm of an ordinary galaxy. Earth was young, beautiful, and empty. The perfect place for a new experiment in free will. But this time, the beings he would create would be different from angels. They wouldn't be made of pure spirit, but of earth and breath. They wouldn't start with perfect knowledge, but would learn through experience. They wouldn't be immortal by nature, but would have to choose life constantly. The Garden of Eden wasn't just a pretty park. Ancient texts describe it as a place where heaven and earth touched. The Hebrew word Eden means pleasure or delight, but it was delight with a purpose. This was meant to be a training ground for beings who would eventually rule not just Earth, but the entire cosmos. Picture Eden as it really was. A realm where physical laws were more flexible. Trees didn't just grow, they sang. Rivers didn't just flow, they carried wisdom from. Forbidden tree wasn't a trap. It was the price of freedom. Adam was formed from the dust of the earth, but not ordinary dust. The Hebrew word Adamah suggests this was specially prepared earth, soil that had been blessed and made ready for this unique purpose. When God breathed into Adam's nostrils, he wasn't just giving him oxygen, he was sharing his own divine nature. Adam opened his eyes in paradise, but he was alone. And God said something that had never been said before in creation. It is not good. Everything else had been good, very good, perfect. But aloneness, that was the first thing in creation that wasn't right. So God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam. But the Hebrew word tadamah means more than sleep. It means a supernatural trance, a state where earthly consciousness gives way to divine vision. In this state, God opened Adam's side and drew out a rib. But it wasn't just a rib. The Hebrew word tselah can also mean side or part. What God took from Adam was part of his very essence, his spiritual DNA. From this, he fashioned a companion who was truly bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. When Adam woke up and saw Eve, his response was explosive joy. The Hebrew literally says he shouted with delight. For the first time since creation, Adam wasn't just satisfied, he was ecstatic. Here was someone who understood him completely, who complemented him perfectly, who could share the incredible adventure of existence. Together they walked with God in the cool of the evening. They tended the garden, not as work, but as worship. They named the animals, not as a chore, but as an act of creative partnership with their maker. They were naked and felt no shame, because they had nothing to hide from each other or from God. But in the shadows of paradise, ancient eyes were watching. The fallen angels had found Earth, and they were studying these new creatures with great interest. Here were beings made in God's image, the same image that angels bore, but expressed through physical form. And among the fallen angels, a plan began to form. If they couldn't defeat God directly, perhaps they could corrupt his. Once gained can never be forgotten, and that some knowledge comes with a price too terrible to pay. The serpent's lie worked perfectly. Eve took the fruit, and Adam chose to join her in rebellion rather than let her face the consequences alone. In that moment, innocence died, shame was born, and death entered the world like a poison in paradise. But the fallen angels weren't satisfied with just corrupting 2 humans. They had bigger plans. Much bigger. If you've been following this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button now, because what I'm about to tell you explains mysteries that have puzzled historians and archaeologists for centuries. And let me know in the comments, do you think the choices Adam and Eve made were understandable, or do you think they should have known better? After Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden, they had children. Their sons Cain and Abel continued the pattern of choice and consequence. But as generations passed and humans multiplied across the earth, the fallen angels saw an opportunity that would change everything. The Book of Enoch, one of the most important ancient texts that didn't make it into the Bible, tells us exactly what happened next. 200 fallen angels, led by one called Samyaza, made a pact that would alter human history forever. "Come," Samyaza said to his fellow rebels, "let us choose wives from among the daughters of men and beget children with them." Now this might sound impossible. How can spiritual beings mate with physical humans? But remember, these weren't ordinary spirits. These were angels who had once walked in the very presence of God. They possessed power over matter itself. They could take physical form whenever they chose. But they were scared. They knew what they were planning violated every cosmic law, so they made an oath together. "Let us all swear an oath and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." In other words, they committed to collective guilt. If they were going to be punished for this transgression, they would all be punished together. None could back out. None could claim innocence. Here's where the story gets really wild and controversial. These angels didn't just take human wives randomly. They specifically chose the daughters of Seth's line, of the moon. Think about this list for a moment. These weren't just random skills. This was a complete curriculum in advanced technology and forbidden knowledge. Metallurgy, astronomy, meteorology, medicine, warfare, and cosmetics, all taught by beings who had helped create the universe itself. But here's the controversial question. Was this knowledge actually forbidden, or was it just premature? Some scholars argue that humans were eventually meant to discover these things on their own, through natural development and divine guidance. The problem was that the fallen angels short-circuited the process, giving humans power without wisdom, knowledge without maturity. Imagine giving a toddler the keys to a sports car and a loaded gun. The tools themselves aren't evil, but in the wrong hands at the wrong time, they become incredibly dangerous. That's what happened when advanced angelic knowledge met primitive human civilization. The results were explosive. Human society advanced by thousands of years in just a few generations. Cities grew larger and more sophisticated. Weapons became deadlier. Art became more beautiful, but also more seductive. Music became more complex and emotionally manipulative. But the real game changer was the children born from these unions. The Bible calls them Nephilim, the fallen ones. These weren't ordinary children. They inherited supernatural abilities from their angelic fathers and physical bodies from their human mothers. Ancient texts describe them as giants, some growing to incredible heights. The Book of Enoch says they were 450 feet tall, but most sources suggest they ranged from 15 to 36 feet in height. But their size wasn't their most dangerous characteristic. It was their appetites. These hybrid beings required enormous amounts of food. At first, they consumed everything humans could produce. When that wasn't enough, they began eating the animals. When the animals were gone, they turned on humans themselves. And finally, in the ultimate abomination, they began consuming each other. But physical cannibalism wasn't their only appetite. They also hungered for worship, for power, for dominion over the earth that their angelic fathers had been denied in heaven. They established themselves as god-kings over human populations.
Match until the modern era. They created alloys and materials that we're only now beginning to understand. The world before the flood wasn't primitive. It was incredibly advanced. Possibly more advanced than our own, but it was advancement without wisdom, power without love, knowledge without righteousness. Coming up, we'll explore the actual civilizations these giants built, the incredible technologies they developed, and the monuments they left behind that still stand today as silent witnesses to their impossible achievements. Get ready to have your mind blown by archaeology that doesn't fit the textbooks. The world the giants built was unlike anything in recorded history. Picture cities that made our modern metropolises look like small towns. Imagine technology that could move stones weighing thousands of tons as easily as we move furniture. Think of architecture so advanced that it incorporated principles of physics, astronomy, and engineering that we're only rediscovering today. These weren't crude cavemen with big clubs. The Nephilim inherited intelligence from their angelic fathers and creativity from their human mothers. The result was a civilization that achieved in centuries what took us millennia to develop. And in some ways, they surpassed us entirely. Let me paint you a picture of what Earth looked like in those days. The climate was completely different. A water canopy surrounded the planet, creating a greenhouse effect that made the entire world tropical. There were no deserts, no ice caps, no extreme weather. Rivers were larger, valleys were more fertile, and plants grew to incredible sizes in the enhanced atmosphere. In this perfect environment, the giants built their kingdoms. Not one empire, but dozens of competing civilizations, each ruled by different Nephilim clans. Some were relatively benevolent, ruling like philosopher kings who genuinely cared for their human subjects. Others were tyrants who treated humans like cattle, useful only for labor and food. The archaeological evidence for these civilizations is scattered across the globe, and it raises uncomfortable questions that mainstream science struggles to answer. How do you explain perfectly fitted stone blocks weighing over 1,000 tons? How do you account for astronomical alignment counterweight system that takes weeks to assemble? How did ancient people move stones that would challenge our best modern equipment? The standard archaeological answer is ramps, levers, and lots of human labor. But the mathematics don't work. Moving a 1,650-ton stone would require approximately 55,000 people pulling simultaneously. More than the entire population of most ancient cities. And that's just to move it horizontally, not lift it into place. Here's where it gets really controversial. What if the giants didn't use manual labor at all? What if they had access to technologies that we've lost or never developed? Ancient Hindu texts describe flying vehicles called vimanas, powered by mercury engines. Sumerian tablets speak of the Anunnaki using lifting beams of light. The Bible mentions stones that could be moved by speaking to them. Even more intriguingly, Native American legends tell of giants who could make heavy objects float by singing specific songs. Sound crazy? Consider this. We now know that sound waves can create levitation. Scientists have used acoustic levitation to lift small objects in laboratory settings. What if the giants understood principles of sound, frequency, and resonance that allowed them to manipulate gravity itself? But their technology wasn't limited to construction. Evidence suggests they also mastered metallurgy in ways we're only now beginning to understand. The Iron Pillar of Delhi has stood for over 1,600 years without rusting, a feat that modern metallurgy can barely replicate. Ancient Peruvian artifacts show evidence of platinum work, despite platinum requiring temperatures of over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to melt.
They also appear to have had advanced medical knowledge. Skulls found in Peru show evidence of brain surgery, with survival rates that weren't matched until modern times. Some ancient mummies contain artificial body parts made from materials we can't identify. There are even suggestions of genetic manipulation, hybrid creatures that appear in art and legends from around the world. And then there's the question of their lifespans. Ancient texts consistently describe people living for hundreds of years before the flood. Adam lived 930 years, Seth lived 912 years, Methuselah lived 969 years. Simple and terrifying. They destroyed themselves. You see, the same power that allowed them to build wonders also allowed them to build weapons. The same knowledge that could heal could also harm. The same technology that moved mountains could also level cities. Ancient texts from around the world describe a global war that erupted among the giant clans. Sanskrit epics like the Mahabharata describe weapons that sound remarkably like nuclear devices, brighter than 1,000 suns, creating pillars of smoke and flame, leaving shadows burned into stone. If this sounds familiar, it should. We're facing the same crossroads today. We have the power to build or destroy, to heal or harm, to create paradise or apocalypse. The question is, will we learn from their mistakes, or are we doomed to repeat them? Coming up, the forbidden knowledge that changed everything. Technologies so dangerous that heaven itself decided they had to be stopped before they destroyed not just the earth, but reality itself. The knowledge the fallen angels shared with humanity wasn't just advanced, it was fundamentally dangerous. These weren't improvements to existing human technology. These were secrets that bypassed the normal process of discovery and wisdom building that God had intended for human development. Think about it this way. Imagine giving a medieval peasant a smartphone, a nuclear reactor, and a genetics lab, but no instruction manual and no moral framework for using them responsibly. That's essentially what happened when angelic knowledge met human ambition. The Book of Enoch gives us specific details about what each fallen angel taught, and when you read the list, it becomes clear this wasn't random knowledge sharing. This was a coordinated effort to fundamentally alter human civilization. Azazel, one of the chief fallen angels, taught humans metallurgy, not just how to work with metals, but how to create alloys that don't exist in nature. Archaeological evidence supports this. We find ancient artifacts made from materials whose composition we can analyze, but can't replicate. They knew secrets of metalworking that we're still discovering. But metallurgy led directly to weaponry. The same techniques that could create beautiful jewelry could also forge swords, spears, and armor. For the first time in human history, organized warfare became possible.
Stars made me do it. Personal responsibility disappeared when cosmic determinism took over. Even more controversial, some researchers suggest that the astronomical knowledge included information about cycles of cosmic catastrophe. The fallen angels may have known that periodic disasters reset civilization, and they taught humans to prepare for and even manipulate these cycles. Semjaza taught root cuttings, essentially botany and chemistry. This sounds innocent until you realize it included knowledge of poisons, hallucinogenic drugs, and mind-altering substances. Suddenly humans could alter consciousness, create dependencies, and control populations through chemical means. Archaeological evidence shows that ancient civilizations had sophisticated knowledge of plant chemistry. They created medicines that were remarkably effective, but they also developed drugs that could induce visions, alter personality, and create addiction. The same knowledge that could heal could also enslave, but perhaps the most dangerous knowledge was taught by Gadriel: the art of writing and record keeping. Wait, how could literacy be dangerous? Here's the thing. Before writing,
Knowledge had to be passed down orally from teacher to student. This natural filtering process meant that dangerous information was usually accompanied by wisdom about when and how to use it responsibly. The teacher-student relationship ensured that knowledge came with moral guidance. Writing changed everything. Now dangerous information could be preserved indefinitely and accessed by anyone who could read, regardless of their wisdom or character. Knowledge became divorced from the relationship that had traditionally governed its transmission. This led to the development of what we now call occult knowledge, literally meaning hidden knowledge. Secret societies formed to preserve and protect certain information. Mystery schools developed to initiate selected individuals into advanced knowledge. The very concept of information that was too dangerous for the masses was born. And here's where it gets really interesting. Many researchers believe these ancient knowledge preservation systems still exist today. They point to organizations like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and other groups that claim to preserve ancient wisdom. But the most transformative knowledge was a civilization that advanced too quickly for its own good. Humans gained the power of gods without developing the wisdom of gods. They could manipulate matter, energy, life, and even consciousness itself. But they used these abilities for selfish and destructive purposes. The ancient world became a place where anything was possible, but nothing was sacred. Where power determined truth, where might made right, where the strong preyed on the weak without restraint. Sound familiar? Some researchers argue we're approaching the same crossroads today. We have genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, weapons of mass destruction, and the ability to alter human consciousness through technology. The question is, have we learned the wisdom to use these powers responsibly? Coming up, we'll explore the golden age that resulted from this forbidden knowledge, a time when giants ruled as god-kings, when humans lived like pets in a cosmic zoo, and when the line between science and magic disappeared entirely. It was the most advanced civilization in human history, and it was doomed from the start. Imagine a world where gods walked among humans every day, where technology, indistinguishable from magic, was commonplace, where death was rare, disease was conquered, and the physical laws we take for granted were mere suggestions, to be bent or broken at will. This was the world at its peak, before the flood. And it was simultaneously the most wonderful and most terrible period in human history. The Nephilim had established themselves as god-kings over human populations, and their rule brought both incredible benefits and unspeakable horrors. Some giant rulers were benevolent philosopher kings who genuinely cared for their human subjects. They extended human lifespans through advanced medicine, eliminated scarcity through incredible technology, and created art and architecture that made the human spirit soar. But others were tyrants who treated humans as livestock, useful for labor, entertainment, and food. Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. If beings vastly superior to humans in intelligence, strength, and lifespan took control of our civilization, would that necessarily be evil? Or could it be beneficial, even if we lost our freedom in the process? This is the moral complexity of the pre-flood world. Electromagnetic field to provide unlimited energy. Imagine towers that reached into the upper atmosphere, built not just for height but as cosmic antennae to communicate with other worlds. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, may have been just a pale memory of the incredible botanical gardens the giants created. These weren't just pretty flower beds. They were living laboratories where plants were engineered to produce medicines, foods, and materials that don't exist in nature. Transportation in this era operated on principles we're only beginning to understand. Ancient Sanskrit texts describe flying vehicles powered by mercury engines that could travel between cities in hours. But this wasn't primitive aircraft. These machines could allegedly travel between dimensions, accessing realms that exist parallel to our physical world. The giants had mastered what we now call quantum physics, thousands of years before we discovered atomic structure. They understood that reality is far more flexible than it appears, that consciousness itself plays a role in shaping physical matter, that time and space are not fixed constants, but variables that can be manipulated. But here's where the wonder turns to terror. Unlimited power in the hands of beings without moral restraint creates unlimited corruption. The same technology that could extend life could also cause suffering. Giants who grew bored with ordinary pleasures began experimenting with experiences that pushed the boundaries of sensation and experience. Pain became entertainment, fear became a drug, human emotions became playthings for beings who had long since lost touch with empathy. Archaeological evidence suggests they practiced genetic manipulation on a massive scale, not just creating hybrid creatures, but experimenting with human genetics itself. Some ancient skeletons show evidence of deliberate modification. Elongated skulls, additional ribs, bone density far beyond normal human parameters. Were they trying to improve humanity, or were they creating specialized servant classes? The answer probably depended on the individual giant and their particular appetites. The worst rulers established themselves as gods demanding sacrifice. Not just animal sacrifice, but human sacrifice, on a scale that's difficult to comprehend. Ancient sites around the world show evidence of mass killings, retaining their physical forms. Some tried to transfer their consciousness into artificial bodies. Others attempted to merge completely with their angelic fathers. The results were abominations that corrupted the very fabric of reality. Beings that existed partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Creatures that could manipulate matter through thought alone, but had lost all connection to love, beauty, or truth. Meanwhile, the pure human population was disappearing. Interbreeding with giants and their human servants had corrupted the original human genetic template. The species that God had created in His own image was being systematically eliminated. Not through genocide, but through absorption into something else entirely. And that's when heaven said, "Enough." The experiment had failed. Free will, combined with forbidden knowledge and unlimited power, had created a world that was destroying itself and threatening to spread its corruption beyond Earth's boundaries. Something had to be done before the contamination spread to other worlds, other dimensions, other realms of existence. The decision was made. This civilization would end. Not gradually, not partially, but completely. The entire world would be wiped clean and started over, with the few uncorrupted humans who remained. Coming up, meet the man who received the ultimate spoiler alert, a prophet who was shown not just what was coming, but why it was necessary, and what would happen to the giants and fallen angels who had caused it all. In the midst of all this corruption and chaos, one man walked with God the way Adam had walked with God in Eden. His name was Enoch, and his story is so extraordinary that two major world religions, Judaism and Christianity, have preserved detailed accounts of his experiences with the divine realm. Enoch lived in a world where most humans had forgotten their creator entirely. They worshipped giants as gods, practiced magic as religion, and treated each other as commodities to be bought and sold. But Enoch remembered the old ways. He maintained his connection to the divine even as civilization crumbled around him. And because of his faithfulness, he was chosen to receive the most comprehensive preview of cosmic justice in human history. The Book of Enoch, which was considered scripture by the history. Enoch learned that the fallen angels hadn't just corrupted human civilization,
They had corrupted the very fabric of reality itself. Their experiments with genetics had created beings that couldn't exist in a stable universe. Their manipulation of physical laws had created paradoxes that threatened to unravel the structure of space and time. Think about this. What happens when immortal beings with unlimited power decide they don't want to follow any rules at all? What happens when creatures who understand the fundamental forces of reality decide to use that knowledge purely for selfish purposes? The answer is cosmic cancer, a spreading corruption that, left unchecked, would eventually destroy not just Earth, but every inhabited world in the universe. Enoch was shown the Watchers, the fallen angels, bound in chains of darkness in a place called the Valleys of the Earth. These weren't metaphorical chains. The fallen angels who had seemed so powerful, who had taught humanity such incredible knowledge, were revealed to be prisoners awaiting final judgment. Their punishment had already begun. Cut off from the divine light that had sustained them as angels, they were slowly deteriorating. Their beauty was becoming ugliness. Their wisdom was becoming madness. Their power was becoming weakness. But the giants, their hybrid children, couldn't be imprisoned the same way. They were physical beings who required physical destruction, and that's where the flood comes in. Enoch was told that God would preserve one righteous family, Noah and his descendants, along with representatives of all the animal species. But everything else would be destroyed by water, not just killed, but utterly eliminated from the earth. The giants would turn on each other in their final days, becoming cannibals who devoured their own kind. Their incredible strength would become their weakness as they literally consumed themselves into extinction. But here's the part that should make us all pause and think. Enoch was also shown that this destruction wasn't the end of the story. He saw that the same corruption that had infected the pre-flood world would eventually return. The same forbidden knowledge would be rediscovered. Entire civilizations with the push of a button, and communicate instantly with people anywhere on Earth. We've developed artificial intelligence that may soon surpass human intelligence. We're experimenting with merging human consciousness with computers. We're trying to extend human lifespan indefinitely. We're even working on space colonization to spread humanity to other worlds. Sound familiar? Are we repeating the same pattern that led to the destruction of the first advanced human civilization? If you're finding these connections as thought-provoking as I am, make sure you're subscribed, because this story gets even more relevant to our modern world. And let me know in the comments, do you think humanity is wise enough to handle godlike power, or are we heading for the same disaster that befell the pre-flood world? Coming up, the man who got the most important construction job in history, and how the reaction of his neighbors to his building project reveals everything about human nature when faced with inconvenient truth. The decision had been made in the highest courts of heaven. The experiment was over. The world that had become so corrupted that even its own inhabitants were destroying themselves had to be completely reset. But before the reset button was pushed, one family had to be saved. Noah wasn't chosen because he was perfect. The Bible makes it clear that he was righteous in his generation, meaning he was the best available option in a world where righteousness had become extremely rare. In a civilization where most humans had forgotten how to distinguish between good and evil, Noah still remembered.
But here's what most people don't understand about Noah's story. He wasn't just told to build a boat. He was given detailed specifications for a vessel that was part ship, part biosphere, part genetics laboratory. The Ark wasn't just transportation. It was a complete ecosystem designed to preserve life through the greatest catastrophe in Earth's history. The dimensions given in the Bible: 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high, describe a vessel roughly 450 feet long, extended lifespans to hundreds of years. Life is good. And then some religious fanatic starts building a massive boat in his backyard, claiming that God is going to destroy the world with water. Not only that, but he spent decades working on this project, devoting his entire fortune and his family's future to this obsession. How would you react? Would you take him seriously? Or would you assume he was suffering from a religious delusion? The people of Noah's time made their choice. They mocked him. They laughed at his warnings. They continued their parties, their business deals, their technological projects, their genetic experiments, their wars, and their worship of giant god-kings. This wasn't ignorance. It was willful blindness. These people had access to the same prophetic traditions that Noah followed. They knew the warnings of Enoch. They understood that their civilization's corruption couldn't continue indefinitely. But they chose to believe that their power was greater than any cosmic authority. Sound familiar? How many modern people dismiss warnings about environmental collapse, economic instability, or social breakdown because accepting those warnings would require changing their lifestyle? But Noah didn't build the Ark alone. His family worked with him. His wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. 8 people total, representing humanity's genetic bottleneck that would repopulate the entire world. And here's something that raises uncomfortable questions. How did Noah gather animals from around the world? How did he know which species to preserve? How did he manage the logistics of feeding and caring for thousands of different animals for over a year? Some traditions suggest Noah didn't gather the animals at all. They came to him, guided by the same divine instinct that guides animal migration today. Others propose that Noah preserved genetic samples rather than full-grown animals, essentially making the Ark the world's first genetics bank. But the most intriguing possibility is that Noah had help. Ancient texts hint that righteous angels, those who had remained loyal during Lucifer's rebellion, assisted with the Ark project. They may have provided knowledge, but cosmic justice can't be escaped through human cleverness. The same power that had allowed them to manipulate matter and energy was turned against them. Their technology failed when they needed it most. Their supernatural strength became useless against forces beyond the physical realm. In the final days before the flood, society collapsed completely. The careful social order maintained by giant god-kings dissolved into chaos. Humans turned against humans. Giants turned against giants. The advanced civilization that had seemed so stable and powerful revealed itself to be built on foundations of sand. And through it all, Noah continued his preparations, loading food, supplies, and animals into the Ark, sealing the vessel according to divine specifications, trusting that the same God who had commanded him to build would also command the waters to come. The last thing Noah did before the flood began was extend one final invitation to his neighbors. Anyone who wanted to enter the Ark was welcome. The door was still open.
Salvation was still available to anyone willing to accept it. But nobody came. They preferred to trust in their own preparations, their own technology, their own understanding of how the world worked. They chose to believe that this crazy old man and his floating zoo were no match for their advanced civilization. They were wrong, and their choice determined not just their own fate, but the fate of everyone they could have saved if they had chosen differently. Coming up, the day the world ended, when the fountains of the great deep broke open, the windows of heaven opened wide, and the most advanced civilization in human history disappeared beneath waters that covered the highest mountains. It started with a crack. Not in the Ark. That vessel had been built to divine specifications and was perfectly sealed. The crack appeared in the ground itself, splitting the earth like an eggshell. Noah had just finished loading the last of the animals when the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. But this wasn't an ordinary earthquake. This was the earth itself convulsing as geological forces that had been held in check for centuries suddenly broke. Water and steam shot miles into the atmosphere, carrying with it dissolved minerals, gases, and debris that fundamentally altered the planet's atmospheric composition. At the same time, the windows of heaven opened. The water canopy that had surrounded Earth since creation, the atmospheric layer that had created the planet's greenhouse climate and filtered harmful radiation, collapsed all at once. Water that had been suspended in the upper atmosphere for thousands of years fell to Earth in torrents that made our worst hurricanes look like gentle spring showers. But the destruction wasn't just from water. The geological upheaval was equally devastating. Continental plates shifted. Mountain ranges rose and fell. Entire landscapes were rearranged, as if by the hands of an angry giant. The advanced cities of the pre-flood world, built to withstand normal natural disasters, were completely unprepared for catastrophe on this scale. Their mighty walls crumbled, their soaring towers toppled, their underground shelters became tombs, as the earth itself turned against them. The giants, despite their supernatural strength and size, found themselves as helpless as ordinary humans against forces that operated on a planetary scale. Their technology, so impressive in peaceful times, was useless against the raw power of creation itself, rebelling against corruption. Ancient texts describe their final days in terms that are both tragic and terrifying. Some giants tried to use their remaining power to save themselves, attempting to create magical barriers against the rising waters. Others turned on each other in desperate struggles for high ground or remaining resources. The worst of them turned to cannibalism, not just consuming humans, but devouring their own kind, in a final descent into madness that represented everything their civilization had become. They had started as beings of light and knowledge, and ended as monsters, consuming themselves in darkness. But here's something that gives me chills. The flood didn't just destroy the physical world. Ancient accounts suggest it also sealed off the dimensional gateways that the fallen angels had opened. The same catastrophe that cleansed the earth also closed the doors between worlds that had allowed corruption to spread, literally riding out the end of one world and the beginning of another. Can you imagine the psychological impact, the fear, the faith, the responsibility of knowing that the future of all life rested in their hands? But they weren't just passengers. They were caretakers of a mobile ecosystem that had to function perfectly for over 12 months. Feeding schedules,
waste management, veterinary care, maintaining genetic diversity. The logistics were staggering. Yet, somehow, it worked. Outside the Ark, the water kept rising. It covered the hills where humans had built their cities. It submerged the valleys where giants had established their kingdoms. It reached the tops of the highest mountains, ensuring that no land-based life could survive anywhere on Earth. The Bible says the water prevailed for 150 days, 5 months of continuous flood that transformed the planet beyond recognition. Every landmark was erased. Every familiar feature of the landscape was buried under miles of turbulent water. When the rain finally stopped and the fountains of the deep were sealed again, the world that emerged was fundamentally different. The water canopy was gone, creating the varied climate zones we know today. The continental configurations were altered, with new mountain ranges and ocean basins. Even the length of human lifespans began to decrease as the protective atmospheric conditions that had allowed people to live for centuries were permanently changed. Coming up, the moment when the Ark's door finally opened and 8 humans stepped out onto a world that was both familiar and utterly alien. A clean slate for humanity's second chance, but also a world that still carried the genetic legacy of the giants in its very foundations. The silence was deafening. After months of hearing water crash against the Ark's hull, the sudden absence of that constant sound felt almost oppressive. Noah pressed his ear against the sealed door and heard nothing but wind whistling across an empty landscape. When God finally gave permission to open the Ark, what Noah and his family saw was a world transformed beyond recognition. The lush tropical that should make you pause and think. The flood didn't completely eliminate the giant bloodlines. The Bible tells us that giants appeared again after the flood. The Anakim, the Rephaim, the Nephilim. How is this possible if all the giants were destroyed? The answer may lie in the genetic heritage of Noah's family. While Noah himself was perfect in his generations, meaning his bloodline was uncorrupted, it's possible that the wives of his sons carried recessive genes from the pre-flood hybridization. These genetic traits could have remained dormant for generations before expressing themselves again. This would explain why post-flood giants were smaller and less powerful than their pre-flood ancestors. They were genetic echoes of the original Nephilim, not direct descendants of the fallen angels themselves. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. We find skeletal remains of unusually tall humans throughout post-flood history, but nothing approaching the incredible sizes described in pre-flood accounts. The giants of later eras, like Goliath of Gath, who stood about 9 feet tall, were impressive, but not superhuman in the way their ancestors had been. As Noah's descendants spread across the earth, they carried with them fragmented memories of the pre-flood world. These memories became the foundation myths of every culture on earth. The Greeks remembered the Golden Age and the Titans. The Hindus preserved accounts of the Devas and Asuras. The Norse told stories of the Aesir and the Jotuns. But they also carried something else: knowledge. Not the complete forbidden knowledge that had corrupted the pre-flood world, but fragments of advanced understanding that survived in oral traditions, symbolic arts, and sacred texts. This explains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. How did ancient civilizations around the world develop such similar technologies and architectural techniques without any apparent contact with each other? The answer is that they were all drawing from the same source: the preserved memories of pre-flood achievement. The megalithic structures we see around the world, Stonehenge, the Egyptian pyramids, Pumapunku, Easter Island, weren't built by people trying to develop new technologies. They were Researchers believe these knowledge preservation systems never disappeared. They evolved, adapted, and continued to influence human development throughout history. The Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the industrial age, the information age, all of these represent quantum leaps in human capability that some believe were guided by the gradual release of preserved pre-flood knowledge. Consider this. We've achieved in the last 200 years what it took humanity thousands of years to develop after the flood. We've gone from horse-drawn transportation to space travel, from herbal medicine to genetic engineering, from smoke signals to global instant communication. Are we naturally reaching these achievements through normal development? Or are we being guided back toward the same level of knowledge and power that existed before the flood? And if we are approaching pre-flood levels of capability, what does that mean for our future? Will we learn from the mistakes of our ancestors? Or are we doomed to repeat the same cycle of advancement, corruption, and destruction? The ancient texts suggest the cycle is indeed repeating. They warn that the same conditions that led to the first judgment are building again in our time. The same forbidden knowledge is being rediscovered. The same choice between serving God or serving self faces humanity once more. If you've been following this entire journey, you now understand why this story isn't just ancient history. It's a preview of our own future. The question is, what are we going to do with this knowledge? Let me know in the comments what you think. Are we headed for another reset? Or can humanity finally break the cycle? And don't forget to subscribe if this story has opened your eyes to connections you never saw before. The choice, as always, is ours to make.